campaign. And as you know, we will be speaking to individuals today who are very passionate about finding world solutions to world problems. And to be sincere, the G7 Summit kicks off later this week, 26th of June. And it's important that G7 leaders tackle the converging crisis of conflict, COVID-19, and climate together. So why not just why is it that it's important for the leaders to take action? It's important for them to raise their various concerns, and also for the youth panels to continue to demand what we really need. So anyways, I will be joined by several people today, and I would like to introduce them in this order. Yeah. Today with me, I have Morris Nyombi. I also have Jonas Intiske. I want to be particular about the pronunciations. I'm so sorry if I do not pronounce it right. I believe when we start speaking, please correct me if I'm wrong. We have Sipasi Olalekan, and we have Felista Wegesa. Now, the thing is that although Russia's war will capture the front pages, more and more countries are also struggling with responding to the global fallout from the war. So now the question is, at the end of the day, how do we bring attention to the fact that if the world leaders decide to pull out or stop to bring attention and the funds that we need to tackle crisis, COVID-19, etc. in our world, how do we move forward, especially for Africa? I'm passionate about Africa. So I would love for the guests to introduce themselves one after the other. It is my honor to introduce Jonas Intiske. I'm very particular about your name. Please correct me if I was wrong.
Yeah, thanks a lot. It's Jonas Nitschke, actually, but
Nitschke.
Yes.
Okay.
But I'm from Germany, so don't worry about that. Yeah, I'm actually a global health activist from Brussels, Belgium, but I'm initially from Germany, and I'm working with the One campaign here, and I'm actually joining you today from the European Development Days. And I'm also a member of the EU Africa Task Force, who was part of the youth track of the EU Africa Week. So we worked on the communique that was actually the document handed over to the leaders. And I might elaborate a little bit more later on it, what we offered there as solutions for the global challenges that arise for us at the moment.
Beautiful, amazing. If we could also have Sipasi Olalekan just introduce himself as well.
Hi, my name is Sipasi Olalekan. I'm from Nigeria, currently a final year PhD student at Kansas State University in the United States. I founded Protect Ozone Sustainable Livelihood Initiative, where we train children, women, farmers in sustainable agricultural practices. I have a passion of ending hunger and poverty where it's most crucial in the world. Thank you. Good to be here.
Amazing to speak with you, Olaleko. You know, we're both from Nigeria, so I'm keen to also hear the good initiatives and the actions you've actually been taking from your own corner as well. Nice to speak to you, Olaleko.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'd also love to introduce Morris Nyombi.
Thank you, Remy. My name is Nyobi Morris, and I'm a youth climate justice activist from Uganda. I've been on front line striking with Fridays for Future and also standing up for justice and freedom of speech. Currently, I'm in the mission of educating young people about the impacts of climate change. I'm creating awareness, sensitization, and also standing up for our existence. This existence, these are the forests. So we are on reforestating Uganda. Thank you.
Fantastic. I'm empowered by your introduction. And I can't wait to get into more conversation with you as well. As we all know, this is a panel and we must, exchange ideas and bring to light our concerns as well. I'd also love to, I'd love for Felistas Wegesa to give an introduction as well, please.
Thank you so much, Yemi, and everyone who is following us today. My name is Felistas. I'm from Tanzania. I'm the head of Youth Engage series. And literally what we do is we are educating young people about the African Continental Free Trade Area. So we are an independent youth advisory council that comprises of young people that hold meetings at least twice a month, just to educate people about the African Continental Free Trade. We understand the crisis in Russia and Ukraine has brought a lot of problems like hiking of prices in food and all this. So we want to educate people how is the Africa Continental Free Trade Area benefiting Africa, and how can Africa be involved in terms of investment opportunities when it comes to challenges like agriculture, where we need innovation when it comes to agriculture and agribusiness. Thank you so much, and I hope to learn from everybody today.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Wigesa. Okay, so now there's something that we need to do. I need us to watch a short video clip of how activists around the world have rallied their support in their communities and countries. Take a look. Welcome back. Welcome back. So now Russia's invasion of Ukraine was a watershed moment. The entire world, and everybody has been talking, and it's been quite a moment. It's created a European refugee crisis, and it sent shockwaves through communities and energy markets, and resulted in global food crisis everywhere in the entire world, to be sincere. Now, although Russia's war will capture the front pages, more and more countries are also struggling with responding to the global fallout from the war. Now, that on top of dealing with the continued economic aftershock of the pandemic and the escalating climate emergency and the spiraling debt crisis. In Nigeria, to be particular, the price of everything is skyrocketing. The livelihood of people is, to be sincere, the livelihood of people isn't as it was before. There's more poverty, more than before. There's even more scarcity of jobs. And let's not forget that we are just coming from COVID, and COVID, even though COVID is not totally gone, I say the world is still in crisis. We're merely just trying to play catch up at the moment. And it's important that at these early stages where the world is beginning to open up, that we all come together to talk and discuss and put forward our problems, because there's something we say in Nigeria: it's the person that wears the shoes that knows where it hurts. So pretty much, if we don't speak from our own perspective and where we come from, there is no way that we will have the opportunity to share the problem and eventually get a solution, which is why I'm very grateful to be joined by every one of us here on this panel. And what is more important than having the youth themselves to point out the problems and to bring forward possible solutions in our society. Now, I did not say this before because I was saving an amazing information for every one of us here today. I would say that it is definitely an honor to have this particular special guest today with us. His name is Emmanuel Bon. He's a diplomatic advisor to the G20 and G7 Sherpa. It is important that we have a conversation with you today, sir. Nice to speak to you. Nice to hear from you today, sir.
Hello, and thank you for your invitation. Thank you for the opportunity, which is great to indeed interact, as you have said, with those who want to do things at a critical time and ahead of a G7 and then a G20 in autumn, which will be probably difficult in the sense that there are so many challenges, and you mentioned some of them, COVID and food security, etc., in a context in which, in a nutshell, basically crises are just piling up. You know, we are reaching a point in the world disorder at which we need to do everything in the same time. And it's not a matter of choosing priorities. It's very much about addressing all the challenges with all the relevant partners and share parts, etc., which is another reason why we traditionally in France are very committed to involve the civil society in all our endeavors. We are so committed to what we call efficient multilateralism, and we are trying to build, you know, the kind of goodwill coalitions that we need to basically push this multi-directional agenda. And you also mentioned Africa, which is obviously not only a challenge of today, but also a crucial partner through all its actors, governments, civil society movements, etc., to basically contribute to the solution of many of the issues we have to fix now. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for that. The role that you play in general it's pretty much a rescue mission, and every one of us here is grateful for the conversation. Back to my esteemed panelists, I would be asking certain questions, and I would like to hear from each one of you, your perspective on how you think we can get our word out to the world. And I'm really grateful to have Mr. Bond here with us today, because he will be taking, by God's grace, he will be taking our words, you know, because we will be saying it as it really is. You know what I mean? Okay, so now my first question for today is, now the G7 kicks off later this week. What will be the success of the G7 summit meeting for you? Like, what do you think success from the G7 meeting would look like from you? What is the one thing that would happen at a G7 meeting that would, you know, mean success to you? I would like to start with Jonas.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Yemi. For me, I would say that I want to see tangible outcome as a young person in terms of especially the climate crisis that we're talking about, but also food scarcity and especially global health, as that is my priority of activism. And I think today at the European Development Days here, we saw the commitment by Commission President von der Leyen to invest 600 additional million into the food scarcity problem. And I think that's already like showing some commitment, but I want to see more. So especially in terms of the pandemic, I mean, we saw that there has been like a huge issue with the pandemic preparedness and the equality between Europe and the African continent. And we basically advocated for that at the EU-Africa meeting in February already, which led kind of like also to the investment of the Global Gateway. But what I would want to see is that we actually use the experiences that we learned from the recent pandemic, especially in terms of equality, when we saw that 70% was vaccinated here in Europe, while we had, I think, numbers of 10 to 12% in Africa, that actually these numbers are valid for preventing another pandemic in terms of HIV, malaria, and tuberculosis. And we're talking here about the replenishment of the Global Fund, which is also going to be decided in today or tomorrow. And what I would want to see is like, as young people, to see perspectives in these converging crises, to actually see that we have a clear path forward to actually tackling these crises. And this means also tangible investment in youth think tanks, and especially also in the ideas that we're going to present later to you, Mr. Bond, that these are actually taken seriously, and that we're also going to have these ideas presented to the other leaders, and that we can come to a global solution. Yeah, and I think that would be already like a big step in the right direction.
Fantastic, fantastic, Jonas. I really love the fact that when you put forward the problem, you are also ready to provide solutions, which is what possible solutions, which is what this panel is all about. Not just talking about problems, but providing possible solutions, for everyone to consider and to put forward and to lend our voice to. Fantastic. Now, Mr. Sipasi, from a point of food security, what does success look like for you when it comes to the G7 summit that is about to take place?
Thank you, Yemi. Success at the G7 for me means that I want to see the impact trickle down on the rural people of Africa.
Yes.
In Africa, we have enough to feed ourselves. We have very good weather. We have very good water and soil. But, hunger and extreme poverty is a scam on the continent of Africa. We should be able to provide for ourselves when it comes to food. So I want to see how the G7 is going to help improve the local content initiative in Africa for us to be sustainable and dependent on our home food system. So when I'm talking about our home food system, I'm talking about creation of indigenous seed banks, which is going to be the template for the future of food in Africa. This is the outcome I want to see through the G7. Thank you.
Fantastic. I would love for you to eventually expatiate and, take us deep into that, because to be sincere, the rural part of Africa continues to suffer. And it is definitely a huge, huge problem that we need to tackle, because the 1% is a very small percent. At the end of the day, the rest of the 99 needs to be taken care of. So I totally get you in Africa and Nigeria, because I just came from Lagos not too long ago. And what I saw wasn't very nice. Things have gotten worse. Now, I would also like to know from Morris, from a climate view, can you tell us what the success at G7 Summit would be like for you?
Thank you so much, Remy, again. One of the things we should understand is that leaders continue to promise in many conferences. Since the last G7 that took place in June in UK, there are a lot of things that have happened that has been linked to climate change. When we go back, only this year, Africa has lost more than 900 people in flooding. In April, over 306 in Cape Town lost their lives, 300 only death rates. When you go back again, still in South Africa, a city called KwaZulu lost over 423 people in 2 days flooding. These are all impacts of climate change, and we continue to ignore them, not because we don't care, but because we are not willing to accept that climate change is real and it's happening now. Last year, East Africa was under attack. You all watched on BBC when they shared a pics of animals collapsing in game parks. How many times are we going to tell you that drought is also part of the death we have today? Because food can no longer grow. East Africa is suffering the worst impacts of climate change, from flooding to landslides. If it doesn't rain, at least it will go deep to dry, where everything dries out. So what we need ahead of G7 is one, we want adaptation, resilience, and loss and damage funds, because we cannot survive without this. And the demand has gone high because everyone now is a victim to climate change. People are trying their best to recover from these impacts, but they can't recover without us approving these loss and damage funds for them to build back, to set up resilient and new infrastructures. This is one of the challenges I always receive, because we keep demanding, but they keep to ignore us. This is the time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Morris. We're still going to go into the detailed explanation that I'm sure you have. Like I always say, like I said previously, it's the person that wears the shoe that knows exactly where it hurts. Now, I think I should have started first with the lady because, my sister is here. But Madam Wegesa, do you mind telling us from an economic recovery point of view what you think success at the G7 summit would look like for you?
Thank you so much, Yemi. I know there are so many expectations when it comes to the G7 upcoming summit. As a young person, I feel we should start progressing and not giving promises, because there are so many promises that have been given and they have not been literally been attained. So when it comes to economic recovery, we know the world is paying the heavy price when it comes to the COVID-19, when it comes to the war that happened between the Russian war and Ukraine. And it's actually a humanitarian disaster whereby many people are forced out of work, especially the young people are unemployed right now. We have a rise of inflation of prices when it comes to food. Importation and exportation tariffs are very high because people are trying to cover up the loss when it comes to COVID-19. So literally the low economic countries, for example, talk of Africa, and the Africa as a nation, we know we want, like, it's now the G7 is an opportunity to tackle these world pressing challenges. And we are expecting that the consequences that the world has faced through COVID-19, through this Russian war, let's now progress and get away from the promises that we were talking about. And when it comes to Africa, literally, the G7 should give a high five to the African countries when it comes to opportunities. When you're talking about food crisis, for example, in terms of economic recovery, you cannot, if you're not feeding the young people that are going to work, it's going to be difficult to bring back the economy that we are looking at. So I believe the war is slowing the recovery. So let's stop the war now. And the pressure of countries not literally storing food and not importing to countries that really need them is also a problem. We were celebrating Refugee Day yesterday, and there are so many refugees seeking refuge in countries because they're hungry. They are moving to countries that have food. So literally, if they could stop, say one word to stop the war, and let's solve these problems are within our means, especially because we know the big 7 countries have the opportunity, they have the power to help countries recover when it comes to their economy. That's my take for now, Yemi.
Thank you so much, Madam Nkesa. Fantastic. Sorry, Manuel Bon, I believe that the youth right now, from everything that they've all shared from their own perspective, and would you say that would you say, to be sincere, what I wanted to ask is this. I want to actually I would love for each one of my panelists today to still get the opportunity to give a proper proposal, a proposal that is worthy to be taken to the G7 summit. And to be sincere, we are really relying on you, sir, to take our words of hope and solutions to the meeting, to the summit that's taking place later this week. I would like to still call on each one of the panelists and let's hear from them one more time in a proposal format, giving us possible solutions and possible tasks that are G7, summit worthy. Do we go ahead, Mr. Emmanuel? Monsieur Emmanuel Bon.
Yes.
Oh yeah, I was speaking to you. I'm sorry. I was saying that I'm about to call on each one of the panelists.
Yes, I get it.
Okay. All right. Oh, so I just want to know that I really appreciate that you are taking our words and our views of possible solutions for assistance through the COVID-19, through the climate change issues, through the crisis of conflict, etc. And I know that the time is money, but we are really relying on you, and we appreciate that you're giving the youth your time. It is definitely a service to humanity. I just wanted to let you know that we appreciate you. Tu comprends, monsieur?
Je comprends.
Ah,
merci.
D'accord. So now I will go on. I'd like to start with Mr. Olalekan. I would want you to put a proposal, state the problem, state the solution, because right now we are taking our thoughts, our concerns, and our demands to the G7 summit. So don't make it too long, but don't make it too brief either. But let our points be sharp and precise. And when we finish speaking, please mute your mic so it doesn't interfere, So Mr. Olalekan, let's start with you. You are in Nigeria. You know what's going on. I'm listening. We're all listening.
Thank you, Yemi, and thank you, Mr. Bond, for this opportunity. One thing I would like to see from the G20 is how we're going to, from food security perspective, is fighting the financial gap. I mentioned earlier that, we need to invest in local content initiative of Africa to improve our food production. And the second thing I would like to mention is price of food should be regulated. Can you go to my next slide, please? Price of food should be regulated. The price of food in Lagos should not be different from the price of food in Kano. That should be done. And also the involvement of middlemen in food production system should also be regulated, because farmers spend seasons on the farm and the middlemen come in one day, to reap off the profit of the farmers. This should be discussed as well. As I mentioned in my earlier presentation, that the food gene, local food gene of Africa should be well preserved, because it is the template for future food, and our indigenous seeds has to be preserved as well. Next slide, please. Yeah, so in order to stabilize prices and protect food chain in Africa, there should be a cut down on post-harvest food loss. I would like to state that the cost of post-harvest loss in Africa is enough to power the entire length and breadth of Africa. The cost of post-harvest loss is enough to provide electricity for Africa. So this should actually be looked into. Agriculture should be dignified, and we should be dependent on local sources of farm inputs in Africa when it comes to agriculture. So these are the things that are going to improve our farming in Africa. And also, we need to improve the gap between the extension officer and farmers for information to get to our farmers early. And lastly, kindly go to the next slide, please. Lastly, we need to ensure that food staples reach people in the most rural areas, people in the most need. And for us to see that that is effective, there should be a public-private partnership in Africa to monitor and evaluate this project. It's not that we don't trust the public sector, but we also need the private sector to be part of the monitoring process. Also, on the decision table, I think it is important for us to involve the rural people, that are target audience, to be on the table. Their decision matters. We should not be the one deciding for them. They should be part of the decision-making process. And lastly, we have to create intentional communities in our communities of need. When I talk about intentional communities, I'm talking about, placing the processing facilities in the rural areas to cut down costs and, accessibility of food in those areas. So with this, these are the few points I would like Mr. Bond to take to the G7 and help us see what we can do better on this. Thank you.
Fantastic. I like that you touched on food security. I like that you focus on the rural environment, rural part of Nigeria, of Africa, because to be sincere, what's happening in Nigeria is happening in the rest of every other African country. We're experiencing food scarcity. There's a lot of waste in food production, farmers, etc. We need proper regulation. The list is very long. I would like also for Madam Wigesa to actually put forward a possible proposal that can be taken to G7 later this week.
Thank you so much, Yemi. As I had spoken before, economic recovery, I must say we are in a very critical moment, and the world is paying a heavy price when it comes to the Russian war and all that. And the war has triggered the cost of living to go very high. We've experienced countries that have actually gone on lockdown. For example, China has gone on lockdown. We know how much China trades with Africa. We know how much other countries that develop that trade with Africa when it comes to exchange of food products. So the COVID policy literally has set the global course slower. So the economic growth is very low. There's a rising inflation, and the situation, a situation that hasn't been seen since the 1970s. So rising in inflation has largely been driven by increase in prices in energy and food, and causing hardship, especially to low-income countries. And food security is no longer food security risk, especially in world poorest economies, have been seen. And we were talking about people moving from country to country to seek for food, where we know that Africa has a very good land, especially when it comes to farming, and food insecurity shouldn't be an issue. So we expect that there will be more cooperation with Africa when the G7 sets up this month or this week. We expect that these issues are going to be raised, and now we need progress and not promises anymore. So the solutions for me will be policy actions. And when we talk about policy actions, we talk about to cooperating together to overcome food insecurity. As I've said, greater international cooperation can help avoid the global food crisis, meaning countries must tackle logistic barriers when it comes to tariffs and other trade barriers that have been put forward due to COVID-19. And literally, this will end up with boosting the effort that will increase transport of commodities out of other countries, and limiting the export restriction, which drive up prices in the world market, would help countries seek substitutes for countries that are under war and suffering from food crisis. And this will in turn help the low-income countries pay higher bills for imported. Advanced economies must look into helping lowest countries to actually lower down the bills when it comes to importation of food. And household prices, we expect that the G7 will support the vulnerable with targeted fiscal support, meaning protecting the low income, because literally when war is there, when COVID is there, the least low economic countries are the ones that suffer most. So we expect during the G7 more support to the vulnerable economies, especially in terms of fiscal support, protecting household. Urgent policymakers should make timely and well-targeted fiscal measures to provide best policy actions immediately related to food and commodity and energy and companies, and also provide support to war refugees. In the G7, we also expect security energy to meet climate goals. We had in the we had a lot of people promising about energy and climate goals. So the war has literally undefined the importance of reliable sources of energy and accelerating the transition of energy. And we expect the carbon emissions will be there, because we have seen many developed countries moving their factories from their own countries to the least developed countries like the ones in Africa. People are opening up in terms of industrialization. We expect a lot of carbon emissions, but let the developed countries, the G7 now, focus on how they can reduce now the carbon emission. As much as they are helping with industrialization and economy, reviving the economy, they should look into regulatory and fiscal incentives that will stimulate movement towards alternative energy sources, but large-scale also renewable energy investments that require a lot of materials or concentrated in few countries. Let them open international trade where they can achieve transition and energy security. And when it comes back to Africa again, the G7, Africa is a huge investment. We know how many young people are in Africa. Let the G7 use this opportunity to give a high five to Africa, as I had said. We must now turn the rural area zones that are of economic misery to zones of economic prosperity, which requires agricultural innovation and transformation of agricultural sector that will create now the jobs that we are talking about, unemployment in young people. And we must make agriculture a real cool choice. When I talk about a cool choice for young people, because people think agriculture is a bad, maybe a bad occupation, but let's use this opportunity now. The G7 should use this opportunity to curb unemployment by investing in rural areas. Let's make the rural areas economic prosperity zones and not economic misery zones. Thank you so much, Yemi.
Thank you so much, Madam Wigesa. I would love for Mr. Manuel Bond to actually give his feedback on what Madam Wigesa had just said. Mr. Bond, can you comment? Can you comment on that, please?
Yeah, no, thank you for giving me the floor. I will try to be a bit strategic here, because I think we can agree and we can concur with you on many things. And I believe what you're pointing out is right. You know, the priorities, the necessities, and basically, most of all, the necessity to empower people and those who can in the field deliver things which are concrete and of direct interest for the people. But I would say, in a sense, we are in a very special political moment. We're living in a world of many crises. And the G7 will happen in the context of a war which was perfectly characterized as the Russian war on Ukraine. And I think we should not underestimate the magnitude of this crisis. The war in Ukraine is not just kind of a regional conflict somewhere in Europe with no implications for the rest of the world. It is a major crisis with global consequences that we'll have to handle all together. And the war in Ukraine is especially important because Russia is involved and because Russia, under the Charter of the UN, is supposed to be one of the guarantors of international peace and stability. What is at stake today is not only, how we handle the consequences of the side effects of the crisis on food or gas or oil, etc. It's very much about how we'll be able to define together our common future and the kind of international order that we want to continue building together after the war. To be perfectly honest with you, I have no answer to the many questions which arise from the ongoing war. I don't know what the world will look like after the war. What I know is that, in terms of priorities, in terms of financing, in terms of partnership, we technically know what we have to do. You were perfectly right. Sipasi mentioned food security, seeds banks in Africa, the necessity to empower the private sectors and give a chance to those who know how to cultivate and how to secure food for their communities. All this is perfectly right. We have an initiative for this. We call it FARM, and FARM is supposed to basically secure the export of grains from Ukraine and basically make grains accessible for all at a normal or decent price, so everybody can get the food it needs. And then on the longer term, farm, which is, the food and agricultural resilience mission that France has triggered in the G7. And then what we want to do is to empower local communities and develop agriculture in countries which are most exposed to the food risk. So we mitigate the implications of the war in Ukraine. But everybody realizes that it's an all-inclusive package. But we need the contribution from everybody. We need to certainly stabilize in Ukraine, but we also need to basically attract the private sector, share parts, etc. Technically, we know how we can do this, but politically, what we need most urgently, I guess, is some kind of renewed political consensus on what has to be protected from, those political disputes which are arising with the war in Ukraine. Second, I think Felister mentioned also food security, but also, the economic development and how we can help African countries basically get out of the COVID crisis in a better shape and prepare for the future, develop an innovative economy. We have a plan for this as well. We as France, we triggered the SDRs plan. The SDRs, are the special drawing rights that the IMF can issue. We proposed, that was a conference in Paris last spring, to share our SDRs, our rights to find, the rights we have in the IMF to collect money for our own national economy. We proposed to transfer those SDRs to African countries, and we got the target of $100 billion of SDRs transferred to Africa. We got this objective as a target of the G7 and the G20 together. So we are working on implementing this plan. The IMF will be able to allocate those SDRs to countries most in need starting next autumn. And then in terms of energy, it is a delicate balance that we have to strike between the necessities of development and the necessities to basically protect the climate and the environment. So here also we have a plan. We call it the JET initiative, Just Energy Transition Initiative, which allows us to finance the green transition in countries most, which need to be supported. We elaborated a very sophisticated and very efficient scheme with South Africa and other partners. Senegal is one country we are working with on this as well. And the G7 will detail this plan, and we will be able to expand the plan to new partners. But again, beyond all this, and I fully agree with your priorities and how you have framed those priorities, what I think is very important for our common future is that we be able to basically have a common understanding of what is the situation today and what we need to do politically together in order to basically tackle all the challenges ahead. So it will be very, very difficult to address all those issues of global health, economic recovery, food security, climate, biodiversity, etc., if we don't basically have the right instruments to cooperate. The G20 is at risk of being blocked and not being able to decide anything for one reason, which is that, it would be very difficult to cooperate or to craft common line of actions, language, etc., between all the participants in the G20, not because they underestimate the risk of foods, the risk of non-action on food security and so on, but just because the basic political consensus is not there on how we organize, on how we share parts and how we basically take responsibility. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Emmanuel Bon, for touching on both Madam Wigesa and Mr. Sipasi, because I was actually going to go back to Mr. Sipasi, but you already responded to his request for preserving the food bank, you know, in Nigeria, in Africa. Madam Wigesa, what country exactly are you from?
I'm from Tanzania.
Tanzania, yes, I think you actually mentioned that, speaking for East Africa, fantastic. And Mr. Sipasi is from Nigeria, speaking very well on behalf of West Africa. I like that we are, at the end of the day, I see that the one common theme that we're all talking about is food security and how the entire world is being affected by the war. Thank you so much, Mr. Emmanuel, for, you said the truth, because to be sincere, nobody knows what the eventual outcome of this war is going to be. It might seem like it's only between, you know, Ukraine and Russia, but at the end of the day, we are all affected. Every country that I travel to these days, if you walk into the supermarket, there are little stickers on each aisle saying, because we cannot get this particular item or food produce that's normally supplied from Russia, we will have to substitute for etc. What happens to people who have actual medical dietary needs? You know, the list is very long. It affects you, it affects me, it affects every single one of us, because at the end of the day, food is life, you know, in its own way, food is life. I would also like to call on Mr. Jonah. I would love for you to put forward a proposal that Mr. Emmanuel can take on our behalf to the G7 summit later this week. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Jamie. Basically, what I call my proposal is unleash your faith. My proposal is concerning the misinformation in terms of the COVID-19 pandemic and previous pandemics as well, which was mainly targeting, for example, the HIV, malaria, and tuberculosis. And I want to start with a little quote. So we can go to the next slide, please. Basically from your friend Yemi as well, Angelique Kidjo. And what she says in one of her songs, which I found kind of remarkable and which gave me like the direction for my proposal, was to see confusion and struggle lost in the dark, you might listen to me, which I was kind of like targeting towards how you communicate in terms of a pandemic and pandemic preparedness for the future. I was kind of like basing my idea also on the G7 foreign ministers meeting on the 14th of May 2022. So if you could go to the next slide, I assume Mr. Bonnet knows what has been said at that meeting. But basically what has been proposed by these ministers was that we are building trust in public institutions and combating mis and disinformation on the ground. And that resonates also with the problem that in my eyes is existing already with health promotion and disease prevention measures. If we look, for example, at the aspect of consideration of cultural and religious context, that will be met with resistance and rendered ineffective. We saw that not only like in terms of COVID communication in terms of Europe, but also like we saw that in Africa. And I think the big problem was also that kind of like everybody was developing a vaccine and was then saying, hey, we give it to you and then you just take it without asking questions. And for me, what I want to see is like that we get better in communication. We lived almost 2 years online. We lived almost 2 years in front of our computers, and we know all the struggle of Zoom meetings, of missed connections, or also of the problem, for example, that we see now that sometimes the sound is not working. And this is all like how you communicate with each other. It's about something like one of the most important tools for me, that we kind of like try to understand each other way better to prevent miscommunication and misleading facts. So yeah, kind of like where I'm targeting, or what I see as our challenge, if we could go to the next slide, is kind of like the focus on disinformation. That has kind of like also prevented the fast rollout of COVID-19 vaccines, because I think a big step was kind of like that we saw scientific advancement that we've never seen before, because there were a lot of funds directed into like the medical center, and especially also in obviously the development of COVID-19 vaccines. But it has also been a challenge in like previous pandemics. If we look, for example, at Ebola, at HIV before, that people were kind of like having fear and persisting because they were not in the field of like getting at least like that people try to at least understand them. And yeah, what I want to see is kind of like that we put communication at the key of our next pandemic preparedness. And that would also lead, for example, to like not only dispelling misinformation in terms of COVID, but also on the future pandemics that might arise from the converging crisis that we're talking about today. So on the terms of war and the terms of food scarcity, if we're looking at food scarcity, we had a 97% increase over the course of the pandemic, and we had 97 million people affected by the COVID-19 pandemic that fall into poverty in 2020. And if we're looking at these numbers, I think that we need to way better work together with our ministries of health and our religious leaders. So if we could go to the next slide, I kind of like want to dive a short way into the facts, which is kind of like also probably also for some of you that you say and support what I'm saying here, that it was the COVID vaccine was developed so fast because it was majorly affecting white people. And I think that's an acknowledgement also that we need to take if we want to tackle future pandemics, that the development of the vaccine was going so fast because we in Europe were affected primarily by it. And people were like, oh, this is actually affecting us in a way that we need to tackle the problem that we're having here. And that's why I also wanted to look back at the Ebola crisis in Guinea and Sierra Leone and Liberia, where we also had the problem with misinformation. And yeah, to give you some statistics, which was a rapid assessment by Save the Children in 2020, in Somalia at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, was that 42% of the respondents believed that COVID-19 was a government campaign. And I think to get from the scientific advancement to the rollout of vaccines in the future needs resilient systems, and especially needs also from ourselves greater effort to actually try to understand cultural contexts and to communicate with religious leaders. So let me come to the kind of like solution that I would propose. I also don't know if it's going to work, but I think it's a creative solution that could lead to a future solution. So go to the next slide, please. Yeah, so basically what I would suggest is that we use something that has been tried out in a smaller circle already, which would be a quarterly recurring meeting with community and faith leaders, as they have a decisive voice in tackling misinformation and also being kind of like trustful sources when you communicate to people in areas that do not get all the information that has been shared by the international health authorities, and also to try to understand why people are like critical about that. So in general, I would suggest that we build a panel of communication experts from the G7, the EU and the AU, and that basically needs to be also chaired and supported by the EU and the AU in Addis Ababa. And then what I would want to see is that we have also communication and campaign experts that has been involved in a previous project that was targeting kind of this, that was done by Red Cross and UNICEF. And I'm happy to also like forward you kind of like the assessment from that, where they said that the listening on social media was quite perfect because they literally try to understand these people. And yeah, so my idea would be having like a pilot project with African countries and see how it's communicated. and how it's working, and then to launch kind of like a collaborative communications commission by the G7 and get advice from the international health authorities, so that we actually strengthen our system and that we show, hey, we have learned from the recent pandemic. So that would be mine. And then to go to the last slide, I would just also quote our wonderful moderator here today, that we are like, need to see that nowhere be like Africa, nowhere be like home, and that new challenges in these converging crises need new approaches, and that I would like to see that also from the upcoming G7 meeting. So thank you a lot, and looking forward to your comments.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jonas. You had to quote us, the lines from my song. I appreciate that. It is indeed the truth. Africa is my home. And I like that you are buttressed on communication. And I would love for Mr. Emmanuel Bon to come in with his expertise and, you know, tell us if he thinks that, tell us what he thinks about your proposal as well. Mr. Emmanuel Bon, please.
Yeah, no, thank you for giving me the floor again. And sorry, I will have to leave you to be in another meeting. My colleague, Omblin, who is with me, will comment more in detail. And she's definitely the specialist on global health, because she's the one who has been working on our different initiatives, and especially the ACT-A initiative, which was basically crafted very much in the spirit of all what Jonas very accurately described. Primary health systems are critical in all what we can do. Over the last 2 years, we have funded many initiatives on the vaccine research, development, etc. But obviously, if we don't have the right infrastructure, we cannot deliver, health to everybody. So that's the reason why we have, as France, focused very much on sustaining or supporting global health systems, plus, training professionals together with the Global Fund, to which we are the first contributor, by the way. And we also have this big project with WHO in Lyon, in France, which is the WHO World Academy, which is dedicated to training health professionals for all countries in the world, with a methodology which is very well adapted to local necessities and realities. So I think with all this, we can really cover the concerns which have been expressed. It is a matter of money and who's able to pledge, but it's not only about money, it is also about the methodology and how we make sure that we indeed embark all the relevant players in this strategy. And I will hand over to Omblin, if you allow me, and thank you very much for your invitation.
Thank you so much, Mr. Emmanuel Bon. Thank you for your time. I believe that you have said a lot of things that we will take home with us, but I just wanted to also say to you, sir, that we the youths, we've gotten to the point where we have, our hopes have been dashed too many times, where we are told to speak our mind, but eventually the things we say don't make it out into the air. They don't ever make it to the ears of the people they need to hear. They don't ever get implemented, and the problem that we're having in the world now, COVID was treated because the entire world was affected. But for us, it's here in Africa, it's a bit different, because now the situation that we're facing, we hear that some of the G7 leaders want to either pull out or reduce the funds. We really appreciate your time, and we hope that you keenly take our request forward to the G7 meeting. Literally, our lives are dependent on your able shoulders, the lives of so many people. We appreciate your time, and we don't mind speaking to your colleague as well.
Just a comment, if you allow me. What you say is important, because it's all about, political realities. The G7 certainly is an important forum, and when leaders meet, it's always important. But the reality of today is that you cannot delegate to governments to leaders in any format the responsibility to answer all the challenges that were mentioned in our conversation.
Yes.
What we need today is certainly inclusiveness, is certainly to be able to work with a set of players which is very large, and we need to empower people. So, you know, we take the messages and we take our responsibilities very seriously. We are also creative, or we try to be creative in what we propose. This is a case of what, you know, the initiative we took on the SDRs and the transfer of special drawing rights to Africa. But ultimately, you know, reality is in the field and nothing can happen without you. So we're collecting ideas, but we need, you know, we need doers as well. And there is no chance we answer all those difficult questions without you. So, okay, we take the messages, that's very clear, but I mean, we'll have to come back to you and also work with you on doing things for real.
I like that. I really, really like that, because we also want to know what we can do. Sir, thank you so much. We're very ready to do, you know, apply pressure in the roles that we can. We all are youth leaders here on this panel, and we would love to, to continue to lend our voice and lend our actions. So I believe from what Mr. Emmanuel Bond said is, at the end of the day, we are all key players. As much as we all look to the G7 and look to the summits that have been the G7 and the G20 and everybody, we are all key players. I believe that Mr. Emmanuel Bond's associate is here right now. If you don't mind introducing yourself, please.
Yes, sure. Very nice meeting you. I was listening to your very exciting conversation from on the side of Emmanuel. So I'm Omblin Gras. I'm an advisor of President Macron, following global affairs. So I'm following G7, G20, and I would say more thematic files like climate or health or food security that we mentioned today. So
fantastic. I'm happy that you've been, you followed the conversation all through, so we don't have to give you a recap. But can you please say your name again?
Omblin Gras, G-R-A-S.
Omblin. Voila. Okay, fantastic. Okay, so we have one more person, one more panelist that is yet to give us his own insight. He's from Uganda. My brother Maurice Nyombi, can you please put forward a proposal? I believe that Mr. Bond pretty much touched on everything everybody had said, and it boils down to money and protection and etc. But Mr. Nyombi, would you please give us an insight? Give us give us a proposal that we could take to G7 from your own point of view. Let not be too long, not too short, but just give us the solutions that you think would work.
Yeah, thank you so much. Actually, as I said in the beginning, that in Africa, a lot of issues that we are facing today are surrounding all in one thing: climate change. Last year in Uganda only, we lost over 1,200 people in 2 times flooding. One happened in May, another one happened in July. These impacts, whenever they happen, it is mostly the women that are vulnerable to it, because one, men disappear because for them, they can only stand when they can afford to put a meal on the table. We have seen a number of street kids on our streets here in Uganda. When we visit Kampala today, street kids are many, and you'll be asking, where do they come from? They are running away from these impacts because their parents can no longer sustain a living. So the only option sometimes is to give them away to their either relatives and other people, making it so hard for them to live a life that they would like, because the government is not ready to support them. Ahead of G7, there are things they should look out. How are we going to help the victims, the climate change victims, to go back to normal? Because whenever they happen, kids don't go back to schools. It is so hard for people who have never seen this to understand. But whenever schools are under attack or whenever they are in floods, kids cannot enter them. And we have seen this even in Mozambique, where a devastating cyclone happened and over 1 million people lost their homes. Today, that country hasn't recovered. I remember seeing one of the musicians, was it Rihanna, going there to donate millions of money, but still nothing changed what happened. So ahead of G7, we want leaders actually to approve the loss and damage funds. These funds are not only going to help one country, these funds are needed in every country. Countries that have been affected by flooding, countries that have been affected by landslides and drought, because farmers, however much we need to support them with finance, they also need organic fertilizers to wake up the land that will bring the food they use to produce. Today, farming in my country is not that one thing we are depending on as we used to do, because the land has been polluted. We lost we have lost all our biodiversity cover, because whenever it rains, the soil just disappears. If you have ever entered Kampala in around September or April, it always happens. You ever enter Kampala, you will see, because life in Kampala is always dangerous, because it's like a collection point for everything. That's why you will see how many times we lose soil from just flooding. And this is happening in different countries. In Kenya, we saw drought that led animals to collapse in game parks. This has happened because the land has been polluted. Trees are no longer growing up. Like, everything has changed. Seasons are changing. Where you expect rainfall, there is drought. Where you expect drought, there is heavy rain. So what we need right now is to look for the financing renewable projects or sustainable projects that are going to help us to recover. These projects are going to help us also to hire young people, because when you build up industries that are helping in production of organic fertilizers, it is the youth that are going to be running them. That is job. So all we need is the finance to help this community that have been impacted to recover and build back better. Because even we don't have free schools for climate refugees. They end up on streets, they end up in camps. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I believe that, thank you so much, Mr. Morris. You see, even in Nigeria, if you thank God for social media, just like Jonah said, everybody's online these days. We've lived online for pretty much 2 years, give or take. And at the moment right now, if you look out for videos coming from Ghana, coming from Nigeria, you would see heavy flooding. I mean, when it floods, there's a different thing when it floods and the water moves. There's actually water that has just come to stay. It's going to be there for a while. It's in people's houses, and people, there's still malaria and there's all of that. And malaria breeds very well in such a time when it's raining and there's flood everywhere. So you see that the problem that Uganda is facing is affecting everywhere else. But I can see from everything that you're saying, because it also displaces families, it displaces children, just exactly as you said. I would like for you to come in on behalf of Emmanuel Bon and speak to Mr. Nyombe's proposal, please.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Mr. Nyombe, for this testimony and these questions that are absolutely key. What you're pointing at is a very hard reality that we are observing, and that is unfortunately more and more, a reality of more and more people, especially in countries you were mentioning, Uganda and other African countries. This is the reason why, at least on the French side, and what we are pushing through the G7 and in the other fora, is that we make sure that when we put aside climate finance and we make they are quite substantial amounts that our countries like France, we're investing a lot in climate finance. We do a lot on adaptation to make sure that that actually we also support people in their day-to-day life to adapt to climate change and to these very difficult consequences. So, for instance, in my country, a third, of climate finance goes to adaptation. That's just to illustrate this commitment. We are very committed to very concrete projects, because at some point it's not just about money, but it's also like finding the right place and the right projects that are going to support people's lives on land restoration and reforestation that indeed create jobs and that indeed make more sustainable livelihood for the people there. You may have heard President Macron has been a huge supporter of the Great Green Wall, which is one of these massive projects across the African continent that is actually trying to meet these various objectives at the same time, right? On biodiversity, but also on nutrition, on job creation, and making sure that all this investment is sustainable for the long term. So it's a long-term commitment. There's been a lot of money pledged, but now what we're focusing on is making sure that it goes to projects, and so that we have also projects coming from the grassroots, bottom up to the money. So our role, I would say, in a place like the G7 is making sure that governments stick to their pledges, to their commitments, that international financial institutions spend the money, but also that we call on all governments to take part in this initiative to get more projects to start and respond to the needs. Just maybe to come back on the kids and this issue of getting kids back to school, also after COVID or after natural catastrophes. I mean, there is of course no miracle recipe, and it's a lot of local and national circumstances, but there are some policies that we can support, such as school feeding, which is a strong commitment that we're also supporting. I mean, we've seen it at home, like in France. It's a very strong public policy. It's been for a century to get kids from the poor neighborhoods proper meals, and that improves their education, right, and their education capacities. And we believe it's the kind of policies that we should be supporting all over the world, because that's an incentive for parents to get their kids into school, and that's how you can also improve kids' ability to learn and educational potential. So that's just one example. There are probably many others that all combined could maybe help us reduce the number of kids that are not educated in school. Thank you so much. So I'm just I'm limiting myself to like a few points that I think deserve being highlighted, but just to say thank you everyone, and thank you especially to 4 young leaders for their testimonies and their questions and their commitment. We definitely need young leaders like you on the global stage. So thank you for reminding all of us of the reality that you're experiencing, and also the questions, the legitimate questions that you have for our governments. That's very, very precious to us. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for your time as well. Thank you for that elaborate explanation. Thank you to my youth panelists as well. I believe, to be sincere, that every one of you in your own way, this is not new to you. You've been in situations where you've had to, speak about the problems and speak about possible solutions. And maybe sometimes it's actually effective, but sometimes it seems as if we're just talking and there's no action. I'm very happy that before Mr. Emmanuel Bon left, he actually said that he made it clear to us that it's not possible to delegate, to insist what the world leaders will do, but we can put forward our concerns, and hopefully one after the other, the concerns will be tackled, because the entire world is experiencing, sorry for my choice of word, but a type of madness at the moment. The crisis everywhere, everybody, the same food issues, but the difference is that the intensity, because in Africa, the call to response is quite slow. Sometimes it's even ignored, and that is why each one of us here is very important, because we keep bringing light to the thing that's been swept under the carpet. And so to further just conclude, thank you so much, Mr. Jonah, Madam Wegesa, Mr. Sipasi, and of course, Mr. Morris. And my sister, to be sincere, I've been trying to remember your name. The way you pronounce it, I couldn't get it. Please forgive me. I need you to say it again, please.
Omblin.
Omblin.
Yeah,
Spell it for me if you don't mind. Spell it for me.
Omblin.
Oh, Omblin.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, finally, I got it. Nice to speak to you as well. So
thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Everyone.
Thank you, everyone, for joining the One Talk series for update information on COVID-19 analysis and to see the shifts of the pandemic and how it affects us as Africans. Please, everyone, go and sign up to the One Africa Shocks Weekly newsletter from theone.org. We will be hoping to also hear back from Mr. Jones, because he said that he would also need us to play a role. We've told him what we want him to do for us. Would like to hear from him what he'd like us to do. So anyways, enjoy the rest of your day, everyone. I had a good chat with each and every one of you. Have a good day.
Everything is changed nowadays. Funny how we can't even play no more. It was only yesterday when we party every day. Now it's blood on the dance floor. All because of the virus. But it can't kill the power inside us to stand together and defeat Corona.
أنا وياك البارح كنا هانيين نقولوا هانية. That things are changing. لكل قلب نرد شوية. نخرجوا إن شاء الله. نعيشوا إن شاء الله. Cause nobody's safe until everybody's safe. Tuamini nalo litakwisha. Na tena tutalishinda tu. Tupambane hii vita. Tumshinde COVID-19. Tuna kila sababu ya kuwajali wengine. Tafadhali tujilinde, tuwalinde, tuamue sasa.
One day my people, one day we'll be celebrating, cause this plague is over. Nothing will be separating us, cause nobody is safe until everybody is safe. Oh, everybody is safe. Oh.
Rain no go fall forever. Sun goes to shine, my sister. We go beat Corona if we stand together. If we stand in solidarity, we no go be too far down, far down. Yeah, me I like that. Me I like you and I know you like me too. Me I love you and I know you love me too. We gonna spread the word and not divide us so. Nobody is safe until everybody is safe. Oh, me I want to be safe. Oh, eh, oh. About me bush in Chile. Feels like good last meal. We'll pick up the pieces, start over. All the tears will be all over. And you mean it will be much closer.